This is the Local Service Business Podcast brought to you by Launch27, the online booking form and service management tool that powers thousands of local service businesses around the world. Every week, we bring you a new episode with a different Launch27 user to discuss wins, challenges, and to impart wisdom from our journey in business to our listeners. We're glad you're here to join us. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the Launch27 podcast. Today we have Mr. Rohan. I think everybody probably knows Rohan, but I will let him go ahead and introduce himself just in case you don't. Rohan?
Hi, Rohan here. Thanks very much for being here. I'm the founder, one of the founders of Launch27 and the founder of Maids in Black. And over the last few years, we've been, building companies and mentoring a lot of folks along the way. So I'm very happy to be here.
Okay, very cool, very cool. So for those that don't know your story, tell us why you started Maids in Black. You can give us the long version or the abbreviated version, whichever you think is best.
Okay, so I guess my real why I started Maids in Black was to rescue myself from a corporate job. I wanted to become an entrepreneur. I wanted to be able to control my time and figure out how to build a business. And I built several different types of businesses, but really found success when I started to build local service businesses, and Maids in Black was the first one. And yeah, and I guess that's why we're here right now.
So were you trying to be an entrepreneur before? Like, how did a cleaning service come about?
Yeah, I was trying to be an entrepreneur before. I had built a dating site. I had built a web agency, an SEO company, all types of businesses that I tried to get off the ground. And during that time, I learned a lot about branding and, website development and how to attract customers. I had never really figured out the right nail to apply this hammer to that I had developed.
The right product.
Basically the right product or service that worked. And my home cleaner at the time wanted someone to build her a website, and I told her, I could build you a website, but it's just going to sit there unless you have the knowledge to figure out how to get clients and branding and advertising and so on. So I made up a deal with her where I would build the company and she would do the jobs and we would split the profits. And that's really how Maids in Black came along. And it really was supposed to be just a small thing that would, maybe make us an extra $5,000 a month or something. But we were able to build that company to, well over $2 million a year.
Okay, so I was going to ask you who your first employee was or person you worked with, cleaner, because I think at the time she was a contractor, correct?
Yes, at the time she was a contractor. Yes, that's correct.
And so you guys just kind of organically formed this partnership where you would drive the bookings and she would do the work. And so how did that work out when you first started?
Yeah, so this is exactly it. It was an organic thing. And I launched the site on a Friday. I remember it was in November. And that same day I put the site online, someone came from Craigslist, put out their credit card and put it into our booking form and book service.
That is incredible. I didn't know that actually. So the same day somebody came and booked?
The same day.
Wow.
Yeah, I posted the link on Craigslist and the same day somebody booked.
And so how did you figure out pricing and all that? Was that really just kind of feeling your way around?
Well, at the time, since, I only had that one cleaner, all I did was to say, okay, tell me how much you need to make for a 1-bedroom. Tell me how much you need to make for a 2-bedroom and so on. And I took the prices she gave me and I added an extra 30 or 35% for myself. Mm-hmm. And that total was what our prices started out as.
Okay. And so, I mean, just as an aside, how many times have you raised prices since then, would you say?
Probably at least 5 times, maybe more.
Okay. So at what point did you think, okay, this is gonna work? I should quit my job and focus on this full time?
Oh yeah, so at about month number 3, we had gotten up to maybe close to $4,000 a month, maybe $5,000 a month.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, like this may actually be something because if we can get here so quickly, I bet we could double or triple in the next 3 months as we pick up steam.
Mm.
And that's exactly what happened. So by month 8, um, I knew that, this was something that could, extricate me from my corporate job.
Mhm.
And I wrote my resignation letter. It sat on my desk for like 1 month because I was still nervous. I still had, fear.
Uh-huh.
But I handed it in and quit my job and worked full time on Amazing That.
And did you see a significant change in the business when you quit your job?
Yeah, absolutely. Like we doubled again in about, I want to say 6 months.
Mhm.
We doubled again. So after I quit my job, like in 6 months, we got up to like maybe $60,000 a month or something like that.
Mhm.
And so it was a real significant movement because I was working on the business 12 hours a day.
Mhm. And what were you doing during those 12 hours?
So I did everything. So customer service, of course. I would take calls. So I would close sales on the telephone, people looking for booking, upselling people, basically all the things that drove customers. Worked on the website and then started working on the back end, like trying to streamline the processes because as we were getting up to 60,000 a month, then it became important to be able to, really have a process in place for like when a client books, having reminder emails, taking the credit card and storing that effectively and securely, and all the other things that makes it possible to deal with volume while not, without going crazy. So I started to work on improving the processes and so on. But most of my work still was on how to get clients. So improving our AdWords campaigns and coming up with social media strategies and blogging outreach and running contests and reaching out to apartment complexes for, kind of like corporate relationships. So basically everything possible to drive business while spending some time on improving the processes as well.
Mhm. And so how were you, like, at what point did you say, okay, I'm going to build Launch 27? Because I know that that's like kind of an integral part of your story. At what revenue were you like, okay, I need to do this more strategically. I need to have systems in place so I can grow.
Yeah, so I think it was around that $60,000 mark point because at that point I was still using like Google Calendar, Google Spreadsheets, Gmail, and then this platform called Zoho,
Mm.
and that was my combination. So it was kind of like a hodgepodge of online services to keep everything in order,
Mm.
and it was becoming very very difficult. So I decided to, create what became Launch 27. But at the time, it was just a platform that was being built to manage my business and just, to have something that was real and efficient, um, to take the business to the next level.
Mm.
And after I did that, that then became Launch 27 as people saw it and liked it and wanted something like that for their own businesses.
And we know that we should have, like, systems in place from day one. But there are a lot of people who, kind of wing it until they get to a certain number. What was that number for you that you were just like, okay, like, what number of appointments were you like, this is impossible to really grow and also streamline, and manage my growth? What was that number, if you can remember?
I cannot remember exactly what that number was,
Hmm.
but I would say that yes, it is important to streamline things, but it's kind of like I was trying to think of a bad analogy, but for me, I want to get clients first
Hmm.
because there's nothing to streamline if you have no clients. Like,
Yeah, that's definitely. I think that's a struggle that like a lot of people have. It's like I want to build all these things, and then you have no clients once you build everything, and it's like, okay, come on.
exactly.
So, but it's interesting too. It's like you want to have your systems in place. It's definitely a fine balance. I would say it's definitely a fine balance.
Yes.
Um,
Mhm.
and I've talked to a number of people who have had established, like existing businesses, who have found Launch 27, or even like I've talked to people who have gotten virtual assistants, and they were like, okay, at first you're initially afraid to put that money out there, but the second you do, you see like double, triple your return. So that's something I always make sure to mention to people when they are questioning whether systems are worth spending money for.
Right. Hmm.
So when did you hire your first person to help you manage the company?
So, actually, right after I got to that, like right after I quit, maybe another month or so. So we were, coming up at like maybe 30, maybe 40,000. And I felt like, I could find some person that can help with at least answering the telephones.
Mhm.
And that's what I did. And so for the longest while, it really was just me and one other person.
Mhm.
And then um, we got to the next point where, I needed someone to help on the weekends and so on, and end up with a second person.
Mhm. Um, and so then like, at what point were you like, okay, now I can step back. I've got like my systems in place. We're making enough money. At what point were you like, okay, let's automate this. Let me step back and kind of focus on, other things being Launch 27 and the other things that you've created.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
So when were you able to fully kind of automate Maids in Black and say, okay, I can step back and rely on the people who I've hired to kind of take some of the day-to-day operations off my shoulders and focus on other things.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. So that did take some time because it really was my first big company,
Hmm.
and I was still figuring everything out as I went.
Hmm.
um I don't really think there are any um it's very difficult to like be totally prepared to build a multi-million dollar company if you've never even built like your first, had your first big win.
Hmm.
So I was just like feeling around in the dark a lot.
Hmm.
And after my third employee that worked in the office and helped me manage everything, and they had been working with me for about almost a year, and like they had built up all this institutional knowledge. I really trusted their decision making, and I knew that they would be on time and working aggressively to help grow the business. At that point was when I kind of felt comfortable enough to step away from the day to day and mostly work on the overall vision and direction of the business versus having to worry about the smallest day to day activities.
Uh-huh. And so if you could change anything you've done in the past, what, 4 or 5 years that you've had Maids in Black, what would it be?
If I could change anything, that's a good question. Um,
Or you may not have wanted to change anything.
well, I'll say this: like one thing, like that question makes me think of one mistake that we made. So in the beginning, when I started to get some traction, and it was like, okay, this thing is going to work. The first thing that came to mind is like, well, if this can work in one city, let me go add 15 more cities.
Hmm.
Right? So that's what we tried to do.
Hmm.
And really and truly, every individual metropolitan area for local service businesses is a new business that you're starting. It's a
Hmm.
new business. And it requires the same initial effort and push and attention and energy as it does to start the original business. So this is something that I learned along the way. It's not as easy as the, well, it works here, let me just add 15 more cities, or or this service works, let me just add 15 more services. That can become problematic. I think it's best to kind of like, push that first boulder up the hill and get moving until you build something that's sustainable, and then you can move on to the second one.
Okay. So what challenge do you think faces people that are starting right now today that are different than the challenges you faced?
Um, so, and maybe I'll sound like, like how our parents are like, man, back in the day, I used to walk to school 5 hours in the snow, uphill both ways. I mean, it's something like that, but I'll say that right now, the people that are starting now, a lot of things are solved for them. A lot of things that I had to solve like 4 years ago, they're currently solved with Launch27. Because back then I had no idea, okay, how I'm going to collect payments. Okay, PayPal, but then I want the payments to be recurring. I want to be able to charge them on a recurring basis and have things as streamlined as possible. Then I had to figure out how to send reminder text messages and find a solution that would do that and maybe tie it together in some weird way. It ended up being manual, of course. Then I had to figure out how to manage the bookings using like Google Calendar and have things, and change things around and not have problems. And so there's all these things, like all these administrational and operational problems that were huge back then. And now with like Launch27, like everything is like those things are solved. You just have to plug it in and just spend your time driving traffic to your website. So I'll just say that the challenges are different because a lot of those things that would have been huge problems and were huge problems for me are now solved in some way.
So what challenges does your business have now, even though it's wildly successful? So those people that are getting up to the $83,333 a month, which equals $1 million, like what challenges do you think that they face? Even though obviously, customers and money seems to be good, like what's the next step?
Yeah, so I mean, one challenge that's omnipresent, regardless of where you are in your revenue cycle, is the problem of finding and hiring strong workers, like people to actually go out and perform the work, whatever your service is. That's like the weak point that I think remains the weak point. So as you're building your business, and as we were building our business, we have to keep coming up with multiple different ways of where to find people, how to train them, how to keep them engaged and motivated, how to come up with like bonus schemes and contests and promotions and all these things to keep that side of the business in place, so that your folks are energized and feel ready to go out and perform at a very, very high level. That part of the business is difficult, but I think regardless of what business you're building, that part of the business is always going to be difficult, like dealing with the human component, having employees or partners or contractors or whatever else.
So what I've been asking everyone kind of to finish this off is one tip for each of these different categories. So what's your one tip for someone who's just starting?
If you're just starting, spend some time making sure that your homepage is on point. So you cannot skimp on what your thing looks like, because what your thing looks like is going to make up about 90% of the decision that a visitor to your website undertakes as they choose if to do business with you or not. So I would really spend some time on your homepage, because your homepage is where that decision primarily happens.
Okay. And so what's one tip for someone who's trying to scale right now?
So yeah, if you're trying to scale, so if this actually is one I like, because if you've had some traction so far, you know where your customers are coming from. So if it's AdWords, or if it's Facebook, if it's social media, if it's your blog, if it's Thumbtack, Craigslist, or whatever, like, you know where the majority of your customers come from. And very often people like have these like 10 places where customers come from, and they rank them 1 through 10, like number 1 being the most successful and number 10 being the one that is the least successful. And they spend time working on number 10, trying to improve their number 10. But for me, I completely ignore number 10, 9, ignore all of those, and spend as much time as possible improving number 1. So if number 1 works, make it work twice as much, or 3 times as much, or 4 times as much. Put all your efforts, like read all you can on improving number 1. Take courses if you have to, like hire professionals that are experts at number 1. Just double down and triple down on your number 1 source of leads.
Okay, cool. And so is your one tip? And I know you've done this with me a million times. So what's your one tip for someone who's ready to give up?
Oh, um,
we've gone through this in my year and a half almost now.
yes, we have been through this several times. So I mean, so there's those two choices. You give up and start over, or you commit to go through this thing, and solve the problems that are in the business. And for me, if you can find some way to get to traction, because you don't really see these huge problems until you are getting revenue. Like one of the side effects of making money is you're introduced to the whole host of problems around the process of making that money.
So more money, more problems.
More money, more problems. Exactly. So at that point, like, for me, I want to think, okay, I am being compensated for these problems. Like, these things come together. And it's very, very unlikely that you're going to find a business that where you're going to be making money and you're not having to deal with like a whole host of issues. Like, they come together. So all I can say is, like, just buckle down, recognize that this is part of the process and this is not an anomaly. Every other person that you see that has been successful, they have gone through the same exact thing.
And that's cool you say that, because that is exactly what has kept me going. And that's like the big reason why I want to do the podcast, because you see the success stories and you start to feel like you're kind of alone in the struggle.
Yeah.
So I love that you said that. I love that you said, like, every single person, like, it's just a part of business. Problems are a part of business, and making money isn't just going to be, one-sided. You're not just going to make money. You also have to do those things that make that money. So,
Yep. Absolutely.
well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. Do you have any last things or anything if people want to reach out to you and maybe do a one-on-one or join any of your groups, how do they do that?
Yeah, sure. So right now we have the Overthink Academy Facebook group, and we also have overthinkacademy.com, and that's where people can sign up and follow along as we build a local business from scratch, and really kind of see us face those challenges that we've been talking about in this podcast and solve them in real time. So I think it's something that's very, very useful. And people can find me on Facebook, Rohan Gilkes, twitter.com, Rohan Gilkes. If I can think of any last words, I think in general, like, we're living in the best possible time to be alive, as far as the opportunities that are before us with the internet, and being able to start a business without being rich, without having to be rich, or having to get funding or take out a loan. Like, we have so many opportunities right now, and I just hope people that are listening to this podcast will take those opportunities and connect with people that are going through it as well, so they don't feel alone. And yeah, I think this is the best time to get going.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Local Service Business Podcast brought to you by Launch27. Are you ready to build a bigger local service business? Check out how Launch27 can take your business to the next level.